Is this a good opportunity or not for us to retain our calves? I kind of wanted to talk just briefly about what the current market situation is and what some of those historic values of gain have been. So this is the current situation. That dark blue line is the 2020 prices for a 5 to 6 weight steer. And so if you look back here in the spring, we started off the spring with a really good price for calves, and then COVID-19 hit and prices dropped dramatically and really kind of stayed there for most of the summer until we got past July 4th. And then prices kind of ticked back up and actually got above last year's prices for a while. But then starting, which I think this question is kind of about, that starting about the second week of August, they have pretty much kind of had a steady decline since then. And there's several reasons why that is. One reason is this graph just represents the seasonal index for that same 5 to 6 weight steer. So basically, one is the average price. And it's pretty easy to see that from May to about August. Oh, by the way, this is from 2010 to 2019. So this is the last decade. The average price for a 5 weight calf essentially came from May to August. Earlier in the year before that, the prices were above average. And this last 4 months of the year were always below average. So October is typically the lowest month for that weight category of calf. And if you think about that, October is not called National Dead Calf Month for no reason. The hot days and cool nights are really hard on them. And especially this week is a good representation with cold, wet rain can really, really be hard on all of these high risk calves that are often weaned on a stock trailer on the way to town. And just the immense supply of them causes this to always be the low time of the year typically for that weight category of calf. Couple other things that you may or may not know is that second week of August, this is, the March contract for corn, that second week of August corresponds exactly to when essentially corn started its steady march upward in price. And, with the couple of exceptions of a couple of weather scares that we've had in the last 5 years, we have been the benefit of really low corn prices. And so I always think it's interesting whether you're north of the river or south of the river, whether you think this graph looks good to you or looks bad to you. But the reality is, if you are a cattle producer and want to sell calves, the price of corn is a direct relation to what feedlot buyers can pay for your cattle. So as that price went up, so did the feeder calf price go down. Another thing that we've been talking about all summer long is this idea of COVID-19's impact on the markets and particularly the feedlot situation. So whenever the prices dropped dramatically back there in spring, the blue line is this year's placements into the feedlot. We dropped the placements into the feedlot to some of the lowest levels we've ever had. Essentially, prices were so bad and the feedlots were backing up. We took those calves and turned them back out to grass instead of sending them to the feedlot. That was an option we had that hog producers did not have. But, even though they were turned out to grass, at some point they had to come to town. And starting in July, you can see that blue line is significantly above the long-term average as well as above last year's prices. And the drought out west helped push those even a little bit sooner than we might have expected. So if we look at the total cattle on feed numbers, you see essentially that hole that we created back last spring is now essentially just been moved to this fall. So that's why our cattle on feed numbers are so high. And so what kind of an impact does this have on the market? Well, essentially there's a sign that says no vacancy in this hotel. So the feedlots are really, really full. And this backs up all the way backwards down the supply chain. So if the feedlot is full and not looking to bring in new calves, then the backgrounding yard that normally would be buying all of these high risk calves, they don't have as much room either. And so it just backs all the way down the line. If we think about what those high cattle on feed numbers look like and what that causes us to think about is we've really been talking about this for quite some time. This is just the feeder cattle contracts, which essentially, a heavyweight feeder calf. Essentially, we're going to have to get through to the second half of next year before we can see really good improvement in those prices. So we're going to have some depression in prices simply based on what's happening all the way back to the direct impacts of COVID-19 this spring. So it really is having some impact on our markets. But, I want you to try to understand what the value of gain represents. And a lot of people don't get this, but if I have a 500-pound calf today that I could sell today for $2 a pound, and I decide I'm going to keep that calf and put another 100 pounds on him and sell him as 600 pounds, and I'm going to get $1.80 for him when I sell him, what is the value of that gain? Is it the $2 a pound he's worth today? Is it the $1.80 that I will sell him for? Is it the average of the two, or some really out of the low number, 80 cents? That doesn't make much sense. Well, the reality is 500 times $2 is $1,000. 600 times $1.80 is $1,080. That calf went up 100 pounds in weight, but he only went up $80 in value, okay? Because that original 500 pounds that I started with went from $2 a pound to also $1.80. And so a lot of people misunderstand this and they say, oh, well, if I put another 100 pounds on them, it's worth 180 bucks. No, it's not, because we have something called a price slide. Okay. Now, if I pulled last week's weekly market report, the difference between a 522-pound steer and a 623-pound steer, basically he went up from $800 to $875. That was 101 pounds. So basically the value of gain between a 5-weight and a 6-weight in last week's market was 74 cents a pound. Now, one of the things that you have to think about is, what do buyers decide what they can pay for my cattle? And it is really, really simple. It is essentially what they think they're going to be able to sell that calf for later on down the road and what it's going to cost them to get there. Okay. And cattle buyers and feedlot operators are eternal optimists. They always tend to think that the market's going to be better down the road than it is today. And so they often tend to bid away any of that premium that they might have in the market. So markets work. Okay. I always track what the difference is between today's price and what the price would be if I kept that calf and put more weight on him and sold him later. So the way this market works, this is the last decade from 2010 to 2019. The way you read this chart is, if you started with a 350-pound calf in the month of January, and I say I'm going to keep that calf and put 100 more pounds on him and sell him 2 months later, that's essentially 1.6 pound a day gain. All right, so I'm going to keep him today and I'm going to sell him 2 months later. What I've done is I've went back historically for the last 10 years and tracked the difference between that 350-pound calf in January and that 450-pound calf 2 months later in March. So this is always looking forward as to what the value has been over time. It's not just the value today, it's the value over time. And the market has typically paid me $185 per hundredweight, or $1.85 a pound, to put 100 pounds on a 350-pound calf in the month of January. I would love to spend a lot of time talking on this chart because there's so much in here we can talk about. But one quick thing I want to point out is, look how high those values of gain are for those lighter weight calves. And our market is continually changing. It is continually encouraging us to get that cattle to a little bit older and a little bit heavier before we send them to town. But let's just look at the current situation. We're sitting here the last week of October. So if I'm going to start with a 450-pound calf in the month of November and put another 100 pounds on that calf and sell it in January, the last 10 years, the average over that 10 years is the market has paid me $155, or $154.69, a dollar and half a pound essentially, to put that 100 pounds on. Then I take that same 550-pound calf in January and say I'm going to keep it another 2 months and sell it in March. So what has my value of gain been from November to March over the last 10 years? That's essentially $275 for 200 pounds. That is extremely valuable if you look at it this way. Let's start with a slightly heavier calf. Let's say I'm starting with that 550-pound calf this month. The market's paid me $127.89 to put 100 pounds on him. And then I want to go ahead and take that 650 and make him weigh 750 and sell him in March. The market's paid me $101.67. So adding those together, that's 230 pounds. And it does go on down as you get heavier. If I started with a 650-pound calf this month, you can notice it's only $1.09 and $72.73. So it keeps going down as the calf gets bigger. So again, the markets are really encouraging us to get those calves at least to a representative weight. But I just, in taking that from table form to graph form so you can visualize it and see it, we are going into a time frame where the last 2 months of the year and the first 2 months of the year are always our highest value of gain for those lighter calves. But realize it's back to that cost of gain versus the value of gain. Those are also the months that it cost me the most to put that gain on because the weather is changing and as well as most people run out of grass. So, when people ask me, should I keep my cattle longer? Is this an opportunity to put gain on? I always answer it with basically 2 points. Is that, can you do it cheaper than the market? Because again, that value of gain tends to equate to what the feedlot can put them on. So I have to be able to do it cheaper than the feedlot can. I can't buy feed cheaper than they can, but if I've got extra forage laying around that I'm not needing to utilize for the cow herd, then that gives me the opportunity to use forage and put it on cheaper. If I can't do it cheaper than the market, then I have to be able to add value to them. And we're not even going to talk about, premiums from weaning and things like that. But if I can add value to them in this time of period where they really are discounting an unweaned, unvaccinated calf and add value to them and capture a higher price down the road, then maybe I can still compete even if I can't do it cheaper than the feedlot. So it really comes down to that cost of gain versus that value of gain. And we don't have time to talk about it, but I will just throw that out. I still believe that everyone should be considering this as part of their drought mitigation plan. Most of our beef producers are overstocked with cows, and by this time of year, we're running out of grass. If I had extra grass that I could use for my calves, I definitely could probably do it cheaper than the feedlot can.